Hi, welcome back to another episode of Relatively Damaged Live. My name is Angela, and this is
Kat.
the live shows are currently streamed on Mondays to YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Remember to subscribe and or follow, and we always loved your comments, so please feel free to comment. On the Monday segment of the show, Kat and I discuss topics we find interesting for about 30 minutes. So I bet you're wondering, what is today's topic? Or maybe you saw the title of the episode. How to not let your ideas become your identity. Now, there is a quote by Adam Grant, and as you guys know, we almost always come to with a quote. One of the things I didn't do beforehand that Kat and I didn't discuss is who's going to read the quote today. Would you like to read it today, Kat? Or
I would love to read it because I've got it all right here.
Thank you.
Okay. The hallmark of an open mind, not letting your ideas become your identity. If you define yourself by your opinions, questioning them is a threat to your integrity. If you see yourself as a curious person or a lifelong learner, changing your mind is a moment of growth.
You know what I really love about this quote is as I grew up, I believe that changing, if anyone changed their mind or brought in new information, it was wrong. Like you changing your mind was not okay, even if there was new evidence. I don't know about you. What was your experience?
As a child, you thought it was kind of a permanence thing. This is the way it is, and that's the way it always is. And I mean, I remember reacting to things based on that. So whatever I believed about a situation, I would react on that way. It's right or wrong. It would make a judgment. Or more often when I was a child, my mother or father think it's right or wrong, so I better not do that. I better just do what they say.
So you're saying in any given situation, if it kind of mirrored another situation that you had previously been in, then there was a right or wrong way, or what a parent or whomever may have told you, there was a right or a wrong way to respond or react in that situation, and no other way.
Right. But there was always that disconnect, though, because when I felt that it was wrong, but I didn't have, it took a long time to develop those tools to question.
And I mean, so then these ideas that you're talking about, like these ideas on how I need to behave or what I need to do. So you're saying, I think what this quote is actually saying is, don't let those ideas become your identity. And so, like for me, my idea, maybe an idea was I have to dress and look a certain way, and if I don't do that, people won't like me. So that idea became my identity. I couldn't wear my frilly cowboy boots to junior high because no one would like me because I didn't fit in, and my job was to fit in. There was that greater purpose of I need to fit in. I'm thinking that's what this is talking about a little bit.
Yeah. And even now as adults, it's a lot more subtle. It's very easy to get into a group think type of situation. So we're all sitting around and somebody says, oh, I think we should do this. And let's say there's 6 of you and the other 5 people are like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And you're sitting there and saying, I have some reservations. More often than not, we want that idea of, well, I want to be the person who gets along with everybody else. I want to be a part of the group. The identity is almost more important than the thought. I'm twisting it around.
A little
The
bit.
quote.
But
Yeah.
I think what you're saying with that idea of I want to be included and I want to do this, that then the identity becomes, even if you think something is wrong with that situation, that then the identity is more important to stay included than it is to voice, hey, you know what, there might be something wrong with what this idea.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I think it maybe in some ways goes back and forth then. What am I letting rule me right now? Is it my idea or my identity?
Mm.
And how do I identify myself? Do I identify, like in the quote, it says, if you see yourself as a curious person or a lifelong learner, changing your mind is a moment of growth. So maybe in that moment of being willing to be curious and investigate, it can be strengthening, is what I'm thinking. Like, it could give me that courage to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to investigate this and let's see what happens. I'm going to voice it. We're going to find out.
Well, I think that's it. I mean, I think it's even more complex, and I think we're starting to touch on that complexity of it, because ideas and identity, in a lot of ways, are very intertwined.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And what happens? And I mean, I can think of a number of things right off the bat, but let's talk about religious identity.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times we grow up and we have this idea. And out of that idea, we have this identity because we were raised or because we came to an understanding. And then as our understanding grows, if we allow it to, we grow and we question that ideas. And in a sense, we also question that identity.
Mm-hmm.
Do I identify as such?
Right.
So, it goes, like I said, they're almost intertwined, and it's really hard to take one out of the other, in a sense, when you're talking about these overall things.
I would agree. I think maybe it's a little easier to live curiously than it is to be rigid in what my ideas are, and even in what my identity is, right? Like, because I think as soon as I identify, then my ideas must become rigid in some ways to justify the identity, and maybe vice versa. So I think it's like, how do I stay out of that struggle? Or not really. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the struggle is important here, right? Because at every intersect or every time I'm communicating with others, maybe I need to be curious. How am I showing up and who am I showing up as, right? Like, recognizing that we're complex in, who we are in one relationship. We may or may not be in another relationship.
Correct.
So I'm thinking that maybe it's helpful to be curious about both.
I would agree. I mean, I've shied away a lot from an identities. I mean, typical things that we say in our society is, I am of this religion. I am of this political persuasion. I am whatever. And to take that identity on as such, like I said, it's I don't like to do that because I like to be curious.
Yeah.
And I find it very, very difficult to be entirely convinced of a belief.
So you're saying like 100% convinced that that's the only way?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
With religious faiths, I mean, how just take Christianity. How many different versions of Christianity are there?
Mm-hmm.
I think like over 3,000, and everyone thinks they're right.
They do. They do. Whereas,
It,
like, the what is it? Isn't it? I don't even know if the Buddhists have that. The belief that they're right. I don't know, but I'm pretty certain the people who believe in the Tao absolutely don't. Um, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm gonna have to be curious and look into that. Yes, that's me causing trouble a little bit.
I I love when you cause trouble, as long as it's good trouble. So so I look at I look at I look at politics, and I don't want to get it on one side or the other, but people are like, this is the way it is, and this is how I'm always going to vote because I am a whatever.
Yeah, they miss the intersection, right,
Yes.
of both of
And
those parties.
yeah. And well, there's an intersection, and there's also a um it's more of an identity than an idea, because it's like they don't even look at the ideas that the parties are saying, the policies or anything like that. They're just like, oh, okay, well, they believe in this one thing, and that one thing is important to me,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm going to, that means that's my identity.
Right.
I am a thing based on one idea without any curiosity at all for the other ideas. Now, I'm saying that's everybody, but there are a lot of people who are like that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in my experience. And so the idea of staying curious is like, you don't really take on that identity.
Right. I
I
see what you're
am,
saying. But
you
there's
know
also, I think also sometimes it's really important to declare where one stands, because if you don't declare where you stand, then it's people can be like, oh, well, they're wishy washy or they don't care, right? So then those ideas and identities can be also important.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, when we have this societal kind of view, an overall view of, you have to be in a certain camp, you have to believe a certain way, when curiosity is not rewarded, when changing your mind based on evidence is vilified instead of celebrated,
Right.
then you've got a problem. So that's another societal reason to sit there in an identity.
Mm-hmm.
This is the
Mm-hmm.
idea, and this is my identity, and not letting those other facts come into play, or other ideas, or curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are times that I think we take a stand, and it's like, for me, it all comes down to is, what are my core values? And so when looking at things, how do these positions affect my core values?
Mm-hmm.
And there are some things that aren't going to change. Murder is wrong.
Right.
Now, notice I said murder. I didn't say killing someone. For example, if someone tried to break into my home and attack me, I might feel justified in killing them. I don't think I'd like it. I think I'd have to go through a trauma to deal with that experience. But I don't know that I would just be like, oh, okay, come in my house, break in my house, and kill me. But that's not murder. But you know what I'm saying.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so that the idea is, willful intentional murder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think I would ever change my mind about that,
Right.
because it doesn't follow my core values.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, the whole, We'll go back to the pandemic again. The whole idea of my response, my personal response, and my societal response has changed and evolved as I have seen different evidence, as my experience has changed that.
Right.
Um, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think we do give a really hard time to scientists. I think it was last week or the week before. Um, some some I had posted a quote. I think the CDC. That's what it was. The CDC gave new guidance in the last month or two, and it was guidance that didn't really make a lot of sense in the real world. And so learning to shift and adjust based on what that said, and what did it mean. Like, I think we can get into this real idea that, well, they can't change their mind, or they can't, and sometimes we need to change our mind, we need to investigate, but we also need to have that knowledge and experience. I
Mm.
think sometimes an experience gives me more knowledge than just reading or learning about it or hearing about it from someone. And I do happen to have a couple of quotes from Adam Grant's book, Think Again.
Go for it.
So, number one, under develop the habit of thinking again, it's think like a scientist. When you start forming an opinion, resist the temptation to preach, prosecute, or politic. Treat your emerging view as a hunch or a hypothesis and test it with data. Like the entrepreneurs who learn to approach their business strategies as experiments, you'll maintain the agility to pivot. I think it's, in what he's talking about right here, it is really easy to think like a scientist at the beginning of something, and not to continue to think like a scientist as we go down a road of some sort, or a path, whether it's a journey with a business or any other thing in our lives. It's like best practices in a company. Like,
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning, we're thinking like scientists. Towards, as we establish it, then it's like, oh, these are best practices, implying that there won't be better practices. So how do we stay in that mindset to think like a scientist?
Mm.
you know i'm I'm thinking it's really not ever coming up with best practices, or at least not labeling it as best practices anymore.
I would agree with you on that. And thinking back to my working days, there were a lot of times where I said best practices, and it was a phrase that was bandied around quite a bit. But the reality of it was is that there were certain things that needed to get done for accountability, for required record keeping, whatever, that we didn't have control over. And so to me, it was, as long as those things get done, I don't really care how you do it. Now, there were some things that had to be done before others because it made logical progression. So there was always some, in a sense, best practice. Do this before you do this, because otherwise you're going to have to go back and do that again. I mean, if you can think of a different way, but there really, a lot of the things that we did, there was a certain order that had to be done, and then there were things within that order that could be mixed up.
Right. But as things change, if you stay in that best practice, it's always a shakeup, like a new computer program comes in, or something. Right. If I can remember, oh, it's not, that wasn't a best practice, that was, now I can experiment, and instead look at it from a more curious standpoint, or investigative, like, oh, I wonder how this is going to work this time, like, how am I going to be surprised today, right?
Right. And I mean, for example, when I was working, I was the expert in the system. I was our sysadmin, and I knew that system. but I always kept an open mind. And
Mhm.
there were still things that I was learning up until the end
Yeah.
that people would show me. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, like things we don't even think about sometimes. All of
Yeah.
a sudden it's what? Like even with my children, I, one of the probably the best things I could have done early on is admit I might not be right, in and of myself with the children. And I can't tell you because how often when I thought I had the answer, and we'd be doing something, they'd be like, I mean, it's, with my oldest, it was kind of like, well, mom, why are you doing it that way with the eye roll? but ultimately, what it was is I was open to hearing that, and I could respond and not be mean, ornery and mean, and be able to say, oh, wow, that's great. I never thought about it that way.
Well, here's the question I have for you then is were you coming from a place of what your core value was?
Ah, yeah. I mean, and that is actually the second point on
Yeah.
Adam Grant's list. Define your identity in terms of values, not opinions. It is easier to avoid getting stuck in your past beliefs if you don't become attached to them as part of your present self concept. See yourself as someone who values curiosity, learning, mental flexibility, and searching for knowledge. As you form opinions, keep a list of factors that would change your mind. I really love that last little part. I don't know that I ever kept a list of factors um, that would change my mind. I just was open to hearing from the kids and being, I think maybe being willing to be wrong. I don't know if wrong's the right word, but not right. Like in that situation, it made more sense to go with what they were thinking or saying than with what I had been thinking or saying.
But I'm sure if they had come and told you they were going to do something dangerous, you might have given them, turned it around in a sense, and given them the, here's how I see it.
That is so much harder. And yes, I did.
Yeah, well, and allow them to have that, and that's where I think we teach our kids that flexibility of thought rather than it is an absolute. You must do it this way.
Yeah, I love when they would make mistakes. You're just reminding me. I know this is a sidetrack moment, but I'm just remembering when I would ask them, what they thought the consequence needed to be when they did something that really wasn't in line with the family values and things like that. And it was usually way worse than, I mean, in my mind. But if they thought that was what was fair, I let them, if it was too much, I might say something. But most of the time, I let them go with what they believe their consequence should be, so that they were coming from an internal modus of control instead of an external modus of control, which I think is really important for teaching children to become adults. And again, maybe that's part of that thinking again. I don't know. I have no idea right now.
Well, I'm certain it would have been much easier just to say this is the way you do it and be done with it for you. But is that really, again, are you thinking about it because they're coming at it from a different place, um, and it's
Kat,
just
something just hit me.
go ahead.
Their consequences for themselves were based on their values, whether they realized it or not. So if it was that important to them, no wonder. Wow, I never thought about it that way before. And no wonder. No one that makes so much more sense. It was important to
Yeah,
them. It was that
yeah.
important to them and what they did and when they thought about it, that is why the consequence. Wow. What a mind-blowing thought to just come come at me right now, and to realize that, because if someone were to ask me what a consequence should be for something, and it really was based in my values, and I broke a value of my own, then I think I would be pretty harsh on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That was deep.
Oh man. Now I'm going to be thinking about this all day.
Okay, there is one more point. I know we're almost done that I just want to get out. Well, there are many more points in Adam Grant's book, Think Again, or Thinking Again. It's Think Again. So I'll just go ahead and read that. It's seek out information that goes against your views. You can fight confirmation bias, burst filter bubbles, and escape echo chambers by actively engaging with ideas that challenge your assumptions. An easy place to start is to follow people who make you think, even if you usually disagree with what they think. So actually getting exposure, which I think actually this is actually a really good top part of this topic, I think, is making sure we're exposing ourselves to views that are different than ours, which can be frustrating, especially if we're digging in really hard into what we believe. But I'll tell you, sometimes I've had people, when I stay open and I seek out that information that goes against my views, it is helpful in solidifying where I stand and what my belief may be. And sometimes I shift and go another way.
Right. I would agree with you on that. And I really like that. It kind of goes back to our conversation last week where we were talking about confirmation bias and all these kinds of you're not as smart as you think you are kinds of ideas. And that's really true, because when we latch on, that idea is the identity. This is my idea. Here it is. There's no room for that budging. So being open to those ideas and looking for the opposing view or views, I think is very important. And it's very, it's interesting. It takes me back to my college days, and we had to have two courses. One was on critical reasoning. And so we really had to do these exercises that forced us to do that. And it was very helpful in doing research, papers in whatever field I was doing in order to get that viewpoint and to be able to support the viewpoint that I had. But by bringing in those opposing viewpoints and seeing them and understanding them, for in the context, and it's that, like you say, that scientific mindset that are one of our favorite phrases. Be curious.
Yeah, I love that. Be curious. Now, I do also want to just point out in the last few seconds here, this actually might be a good question. It was posed to over the last week. It's been something I've been pondering. The question, or it said, define yourself was the instruction. Now, what would happen if you let go of all of that? Not just what is viewed as good and what is viewed as bad, but all of it, and then just got curious. Like, I just think that would be really interesting exercise.
and here's what I'll say. If for me, if I'm trying to stay curious, I'm getting to the point where I just say, I am.
I love that. You are. And because you are, that's enough. One of my favorite quotes. Okay, everybody, it's the 30 minutes. We're going to end our show. There is also a Relatively Damaged podcast where I interview amazing guests who've overcome some sort of struggle in their lives and how they found hope and healing. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple, and many more. I'm Angela, and this is
Kat.
We'll see you next week. Thanks for coming.